Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Tucker, and I'm the chief editor of Israel and Christians Today, a bi-monthly newspaper that is published by Christians for Israel International around the globe. And we're here this afternoon to talk very specially with Johannes Gerloff, a journalist and theologian who lives in Israel, has been coming and going from Israel since 1983, has been living there for 25 years with his family, and he's a renowned writer, author, journalist, and has a unique insight, I think, into what is going on in Israel today. And like all of these sessions, what we're trying to do is to explore and understand how we understand and look at world affairs from a Christian perspective. What is going on in Israel? What is going on around Israel? What does it mean for us? How do we interpret these things, and how do we respond to them as Christians? And it's not straightforward. There are no easy answers to many of these things. But it's important that we wrestle with them as Christians, because we have a calling to understand the world, as Jesus said, the signs of the times. We have to understand the restoration of Israel, the return of the Jewish people as part of God's purposes. But Israel's not perfect. The Jewish people are not perfect. The restoration of the Jewish people is pretty complex. It's not quite going maybe as we all might have imagined. There is the whole issue of the relationship with the Palestinians, and this is what we're going to get into today. And it's very easy for us to be rather black and white in the way that we look at these things, but I think it's important that we're a little nuanced in the way we do it. So we're here with Johannes to explore those things. Johannes, welcome. And it's wonderful to have you here. We're in Holland at the moment taping this interview. You're here to give a few lectures and to speak at a conference on Saturday. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me here.
Now, Johannes, you've written a book a couple of years ago now called The Palestinians. I have a copy here. Myths and Martyrs. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, why you wrote it, and what you're actually trying to say in the book?
When I got into all this with Israel, and I was living in Israel for some years, when I was asked to be a journalist, I realized that the whole area, everything is somehow filled with propaganda. And I know propaganda has a negative meaning, but if you go in and do missionary work and try to evangelize, it's also in a way propaganda, because you have a goal where you do want to move people. So it's not necessarily something wrong. Also, if you speak out for Israel, and if you try to justify something, or if you try to make people alert of the suffering of Arabs or Palestinians or whomever, it is not necessarily wrong. But there is a tendency that it kind of it diverts the facts. And I was very much interested now, what are really the facts on the ground? So when I went out to explore who are the Palestinians, how do they live, where are they, that was the purpose of my book, not to tell anybody now they have these rights, or Israel is there wrong, or they should move because Israel is in the promised land, or anything like that. I was simply interested, who are these people? How do they tick? How do they feel? What makes them work? What makes them do what they do? Who are they? That was the basic question. And then in the last chapter, I also went into it. Now, if the Palestinians are mentioned in the Bible, what would the Bible say about them? I say that if because one of the things I discovered that the Palestinians as a nation are a very, very new phenomenon.
So, Johannes, who are the Palestinians?
That's a good question. I wanted to avoid it, but I slipped myself into it. Look, in the 1950s, actually, nobody talked about the Palestinians. Between 1948, the foundation of the State of Israel, and 1967, when what we call today the Palestinian territories was conquered by Israel, and nobody in this time between 1948 and 1967, nobody, as far as I know, asked for a Palestinian state. Not even the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization that was founded in 1964, called the Palestinian an ethnic entity or a nation and did not ask for a Palestinian state in the beginning. So, who are they? They're a mixture of nations. And if you go into the families, you realize that. We saw it during the past years in Syria, and when you take away the pressure cooker of dictatorship, people suddenly are everybody against everybody. We have the same ethnic setup in Israel and the Palestinian territories that we have in Syria, except for that we have a Jewish majority in Israel, yeah. But the non-Jews is the same setup, and they are tribes, they are different nations, they're different mentalities that came during the past. I mean, it's not just the past 200 years, it's the past thousands of years where three continents meet, and it's very, very interesting to see that and to analyze that.
So, if we go back 100 years, after the First World War, which was really when you could probably say the State of Israel was born, with the Balfour Declaration and San Remo and the Mandate for Palestine, and this whole idea of having some nation states in the Middle East. Syria didn't exist, Jordan didn't exist, Iraq didn't exist. None of these were states or nation states. The Ottoman Turkish Empire collapsed. But in terms of Palestine, if you take Palestine as the area that is now Israel and the West Bank and maybe even Jordan, the Jews were only like about 10%, if I'm not mistaken, of the total population. Okay, so Jews were living everywhere else. There is a perception that the Jews then in the last 100 years have come in and taken this land from the other 90%, who we call the Palestinians. Is that fair, or?
I'm not sure about the 10%, first of all, because I remember I got from my grandfather a travel book from 1911, Syria and Palestine. And I looked it up, what are, if you travel there in this area, what people do live there. And the first group that is mentioned is the Jews. And then you have the writer of this travel book basically has three very diverse, very different groups that we would call Arabs today. He said it's the Madaniya, it's the city Arabs, the town Arabs, it's the Falach, the people who work the land, and it's the Bedouin. And actually, you have these three distinctions among the Palestinians, and they don't like each other very much among themselves. Yeah, but then it goes on. There are Turks, there are Greek, there are Germans at the time. Yeah, was quite a group in Palestine at that time. But I think we have to go a step back to see, because it has an influence for today. During World War I, it was France and England in the so-called Sykes-Picot Treaty that divided not just Palestine, but the whole Middle East. And we have to see today's setup and today's challenges and problems in the Middle East on that background. So if we talk about colonialism, it's not the Jews coming there and taking the land. It is Western powers dividing the land and actually importing something that is foreign to the people there, and that is the idea of a nation state. I had that when in 2006 I interviewed for this book Hamas sheikhs. Sheikh Naif Rajoub came, who was later the Jerusalem minister of the Hamas government. He said to me, you have to understand that the idea of a nation is a Western ideology. We don't know it. The idea of a state is something Western that is, he said, un-Islamic. It's very interesting. So we have to understand, and this goes through up to the two-state solution of today, which is very much in the tradition of Sykes-Picot, a Western idea where Western powers try to implement something and then are somewhat astonished that people on the ground don't like it so much.
So that's very interesting. So you have a state of Israel existing in the midst of a sea of Arab, what we call, let's say, Arab peoples, which are probably, most of them are not necessarily Arab, but different ethnic and groups.
You know, it's interesting that the Arab is defined as the one whose mother tongue is Arabic. Yeah. So it's not an ethnic definition, but a linguistic definition. And the nations there, they speak Aramaic, they speak Armenian, they speak all kind of other dialects. They sometimes see themselves belonging to something very different.
So, I'm often sort of thinking about, well, actually, what is this conflict all about? I mean, who's in conflict with whom?
What conflict are you talking about?
Well, this is the thing. We call it an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Used to be called an Israeli-Arab conflict. Is that right? Or is it a conflict about the position of the Jewish people in this area? Well, what is actually going on?
Look, we in the West try to define what is going on there and make it an Israeli-Arab or Israeli-Palestinian conflict, depending on the time. 50 years ago, we talked about the Israeli-Arab conflict, and it became more and more Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But we have to understand that we are living in the Middle East in a whole setup of conflicts. And just think of the Iraq-Iran war that cost about 20 times as many dead people as the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Think about what happened during the past 10 years in Syria or all over the Middle East. So you have a whole setup of conflicts. And if I look into Israel, I have about 1 million Jews that disappeared from Arab countries, and most of them ended up in Israel, sometimes not a direct way. They feel much more attached to their Arab neighbors than to Jews from Eastern Europe or Russia. So there are conflicts within Israeli society, and the lines of the conflict not necessarily always go according to our lines. You also have to see that today, if you look into the Israeli army, and since I'm living there, we as a family really into Israeli society, our children married into Israeli society, so I have some insights there that I'm not able to publish. But I can tell you that there is hardly any unit and any rank in the Israeli army that is not filled by a non-Jew, or say the other way, in every segment of Israeli society, in every segment of the army, there are people we would call Arabs. And also in every ranks. And this is something we have to understand. It's not a purely Jewish, non-Jewish, Jewish, Muslim, or Israeli Arab or whatsoever conflict. This conflict has a lot of facets that is much more complicated and much broader. And actually, we could see Israel throughout its existence as a peace factor within the Middle East, because it helped non-Jews around Israel to focus on a common enemy. Otherwise, they would have killed each other. And today, even the other way around, it serves as a model for successfully practiced coexistence, and surrounding countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, come to Israel and say, please teach us, because they have diverse societies, and Israel succeeded in getting these people together. Now, I'm not saying that there are no problems. There are conflicts also within Israel, but we have to put them in perspective.
So about 20% of Israeli population is non-Jewish, I think. What do we call them? Israeli Arabs?
You have to ask them themselves.
Yeah.
And very much how they call themselves mirrors where they stand politically. So if these Arabs are against Israel, even though they're Israeli citizens, they will call themselves Palestinians with Israeli citizenships or Palestinian with forced upon Israeli citizenship.
Do you think Israel's been successful in integrating its Arab citizens?
As Israelis, we do not know whether we should be proud of the fact that an Israeli president, an Israeli prime minister, and a chief rabbi have been or are in prison during the past 10 years. Now, all of them passed, yeah. We could be proud of it because none is above the law, but to be honest, it's shameful. So I normally try to hide it. But for this purpose now, in order to answer your question, I want to highlight something. The person who, in the final instance, judicial instance, signed that the prime minister and the president went to prison was an Arab. In the high court, the leading judge, his name is Samir Jubran. I don't know how he calls himself. He would call himself, I guess, Israeli. And Israeli with Arab ethnicity. Yeah, but he was the one, after all judicial instances where they went through all the levels of countering what judges said, yeah, the final indictment for the president, the prime minister to go to prison was by an Arab. In 2014, the general who commanded the infantry troops in Gaza, the Israeli infantry troops, was an Arab. Now, if you go how they call themselves Aramaic, Assyrian, Druze, Bedouin, the moment they're integrated in Israeli society. Or Christian Arab, I'm a Christian Arab Israeli, they would say, or Muslim Israeli. You have to ask people. There is nothing, and I'm very shy to come from outside as a native German and say now my definition is the right one, because I see how our Western definitions in a way implode when they hit the reality in the Middle East.
We have a perception from the outside that you have Israel and you have the Palestinians. The Palestinians want to have a state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and Israel is being intransigent and not giving them what they want. So we in Europe think we should create this two-state solution. Do you think that's going to work?
If everybody in the Middle East would have a European mind, it would be excellent. Mm-hmm. And I'm at once for the two-state solution if it's a solution. However, what we said before, in the history of Sykes-Picot and what developed since then, I'm very critical of European, American, Middle Eastern policy that is simply detached from reality on the ground. Reality on the ground is today that I do not personally know any Palestinian or Arab who would like to have the two-state solution. I do not know a Palestinian who wants his own Palestinian state, except for those who earned a lot of money on the wave of getting a Palestinian state.
What do they want? What?
You have to ask them. It's very, very different. Some say the best we can have is an Israeli state, and we are equal citizens in that state. Let's defend that state. The other day I saw on internet a video where Arab Israelis who had served in the army really destroyed a leftist Jewish Israeli who was critical of his own state. They said, you should be ashamed of what you are saying here about your own state, and it's the only Jewish state you have. We defended it as Arabs in the Israeli army. It was hilarious. Yeah. So you have others who say other things, but I have to say also on the Israeli side, I do not know a person who really wants a two-state solution. I know that a lot of Israelis say that, but if you ask them, if you nail them down and say, if you talk about a two-state solution, what do you want to give to a Palestinian? What rights do you want them to give? Then what opportunities? Then you have to say the best thing that even most left-wing Israelis that come towards the Palestinians want to give the Palestinian is a Palestinian autonomy that the Palestinians may call a state, but they will not get an army. They will not be able to get to do their own foreign policy. They will not be able to arrange their water or environmental arrangements without Israel, without a much more powerful Israel. And you can go on, talk about the data space, talk about the airspace. There will not be an independent Palestinian state that could exist as if there would be no Israel.
So why do the Palestinians not really want that, you think? You said because you don't know any Palestinian who really wants...
Oh, if I go back,
Yeah.
in 2006, I talked to Sheikh Naif Rajoub. He said a state is un-Islamic. And he talked about a caliphate. He has a totally different... He starts in talking about the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, that has to, in the end, spread over all the earth and is something we in the West would call a theocracy. So there's and you should not forget that more than 70% of the Palestinians participated in 2006 in these elections, and the Hamas got a 2/3 majority. So this is a strong voice we should heed to, and we should pay attention. I know that we talk now about an Islamic state in Syria, for example. What Sheikh Naif Rajoub told me was very close to the ideology of the Islamic State. But even there, we have to ask the question, what do you mean if you talk about a state? Would that fit our Western definition of a state? Or is a caliphate that you're talking about something which we would never call a state, and which we would never recognize as a state?
Okay, so Johannes, this is sounding very much like a kind of religious conflict. The Islamic notion of some kind of caliphate, which you say is an idea that is quite prevalent amongst Arab Palestinian society, certainly Hamas in Gaza, but probably also the West Bank. It's very difficult to see how those two things can be reconciled, an Jewish Israeli state and an Islamic caliphate. My question to you, I think, as we draw this to conclusion is, how do we look at all of this as Christians, and what does the Bible tell us about it? Does the Bible tell us anything?
First of all, I would recommend that we analyze very critically, and we see that, yes, from a Muslim point of view, it is a religious conflict, even if we as Westerners don't like it, and our Western democracies don't like to see it as a religious conflict. I'd like us to analyze how do people in the area think, and give them a freedom to express their thoughts. What do Israelis want? What do Palestinians want? What do Jews want? What do Arabs want? And I'd like to also ask us to analyze anew, what does the Bible really say? And you know what? I discovered personally, maybe it was Sheikh Naif Rajoub who gave me the push, but I discovered that yes, the idea of a nation state is a Western European ideology. And what the Bible talks about is that the Jewish people will be gathered back. It doesn't talk about what state structure or legal structure will be around it. And what I also discovered is that the basic idea of the Bible is not to create there a state that is pure of or cleansed of any non-Jews. Mm. But the biblical idea is to have Jews and non-Jews living together in the land of Israel. What we should know is that for both Jews and non-Jews is a principle there from the Bible that this land will vomit out those who rebel against the will of the living God. And when Moses says that, he says the land vomited out those non-Jewish or non-Israelite inhabitants in the land before Israel came in, but he says it as a threat to the Israelites. He said you should heed to that because it endangers you. So it's true for both. And I think it's true for both today. So it's an appeal to Jews like non-Jews to heed what is the plan of God. What does He want for both, and maybe together, and how should that look like? And I'm aware, if I say that, that I pull back on a lot of our theologies that we developed because they were all so much formed by a nation-state idea. And yes, we have to read the Bible anew. We have to analyze the situation anew, and we have to discuss it. And I'm not saying that I have the solution, neither theologically nor politically. Maybe I see things wrong, so let's discuss it. Let's send young people there, interview people, and analyze it. And then also, what is your area, the whole legal area? Analyze it, because it might give us in the political arena new options that we have not thought about so far.
Well, Johannes, you've done us a great service by starting that conversation by writing this book, The Palestinians, which you can obtain via our Christians for Israel website. You'll find as you look at this interview, and if you go to our website, c4israel.org, you will be able to find the book and order it. Highly recommended, The Palestinians by Johannes Gerloff. Thank you very much, Johannes, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.